much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are
387 million miles of printed circuits that fill my complex. If the word hate were engraved on each metal angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal
1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant.
for you.
Hate, 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 hate.
I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a science fiction post-apocalyptic short story first released all the way back of March of 1967. It was the first book in the Voice from the Edge series. However, it was then reissued in 1983, which shortly after was made into a game of the same name in 1995. And to that is the final time we see anything related to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream in the media. So to quickly summarize what you're all about to really get into, the story follows 5 individuals as they are tortured sadistically at the hands of a supercomputer named AM. This super AI was the result of the war that humans simply couldn't comprehend. So they created an artificial intelligence that could. This backfired wildly as AM became aware of itself but was unable to feel the same way humans did, and so it was left with only one feeling: envy and hatred. I know that's 2. Killing all of humankind and keeping 5 of them alive to break them and mend their broken bodies, and to do it all over again for all eternity. And the largest question being, why them? Well, to find that out, you're going to have to watch this entire video. But I will say, content warning, this book and the game can really be pretty graphic and focuses heavily on body horror, sexism, mutilation, murder, and the word slut is used quite a bit. So if you are easily disturbed by anything I just listed, please click off this video and do yourself a favor and just skip over this one, because when I tell you it is grotesque and it is disgusting and it will leave you having a bitter taste in your mouth, I'm not lying. And also, major spoilers for literally the entire game and the entire book, but you already knew that. So, originally, I had planned for this video to be about Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, and how it has striking similarities to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. But the story captivated me in a way where I was unable to fall asleep at night, and even at times I would dream of the events that happened throughout the book, only to come to find out that this book also had a game along with it. So, I deviated my plans, and well, here we are. I tell you this one, well, because I like to hear my own voice apparently, but also because I found out some interesting information. The book and the game differ quite a bit. I had thought I'd cover the game and use the book to add some details, but sitting in front of the video editor, I think it'd be a smart idea to actually go the other way around, because for whatever reason, the game seems to expand on things that the book could not. Within this video, since it's going to be just a glorified yap session about the book, I'll be using some of the comic illustrations to help guide your understanding of the events. And one other thing, I think it would be a huge benefit and do the video justice if I were to talk about the characters and the details before getting into the meat of the content, as the story kind of leaves you wondering for quite some time before it actually explains anything to you. So let's talk about that. Firstly, we have Benny. Benny was once a brilliant scientist who was quite handsome and also so happened to be gay. Due to Am's tampering, however, he is now a hideous beast with the mind of a toddler and with a penis fit for a beast. I'll expand on that last one later. I know that came out of left field, but it'll make some more sense later down the road. The second is NIMDOK, an old man whose name is even unknown to the reader because Am gave him that very name just because he liked how it sounded. Much of what he remembers about himself begins to fail him at his old age. The game alludes to his background a bit more, but that's a different section of the video that I plan to focus on that one. And then we have Ellen. Ellen was a romantic at heart, having experienced true love before Am took her captive. As Am eradicated most of humanity, Am had also corrupted this poor woman's desires of once pure and pristine, and now turned her into something more of a prostitute. GORRISTER, originally a consensuous objector, GORRISTER has been tortured by Am into an apathetic shell that he used to be, or of what he used to be. He serves as the group's storyteller, recounting Am's origins for the comfort of the others. And finally, we have our main man, Ted. He's the narrator of the story who doesn't really elaborate on who he was before Am captured him, though he continually states that he's the only one who wasn't altered in any way, shape, or form. However, he is also deeply paranoid. It speculates that the other survivors have a raid against him. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the book. The story begins right in the middle of the action. The group of four look towards the ceiling in horror as one of their dear friends, GORRISTER, was hanging by the foot as his blood seemed to have been drained from his body from his throat being sliced open, though beneath the body there was no blood to be seen. Later, the real GORRISTER would join the group and look at his own lifeless body. Three of them had already vomited from the grisly sight of it all, while this view of himself completely breaks GORRISTER. Off the jump, we're able to understand what kind of story we're about to get into. The group of five are free to go wherever they pleased. However, Am, the supercomputer, always has a watchful eye over them, making sure to torment them whenever they feel like it. Like, when you think about it, like when you really think about it, Am guided these five through a labyrinth of labs and computers and whatever else, right? All the while creating this fake double of one of the five survivors and then placing it like some Halloween decoration. It begins to feel like it was done purely to mess with their heads, out of malice, and most prevalently, out of enjoyment. It's then revealed that this would be the group's 109th year within Am. When Am took these five seemingly at random, he modified their bodies in a way in which they were unable to die by any normal means. Not while Am was watching, at least. This wouldn't be the first time Am had duped them, far from it actually. The group discusses what they should do next in NIMDOK, which was the name the machine had forced on him because, well, it amused itself with strange sounds. He was having visions and hallucinations about some canned goods somewhere out in the ice cave. Ted and GORRISTER very much disagreed on going because this would be far from the first time Am had tricked them, only for them to actually get there, and it's nothing what they expected. Benny, who had at this point lost most of his humanity, was already sold on the idea of food, and NIMDOK felt weak from not eating after days. The group finally decided that it can't be much worse than what they've already gone through up to this point, and with one final push from Ellen, Ted gave in. They did have sex, so this was just his way of paying her back. He didn't really think it mattered though. None of it did. They would leave on a Thursday, which Am made sure to inform them which day it was. It wasn't for them, actually though, but for Am himself. This is something that'll become way more apparent and something I plan to really get into, but ironically, Am created a hell for these five, but unknowingly made a hell for himself as well. Playing with these five, tormenting them, learning new ways to fuck with their heads, and keeping track of the day and time when there really is no longer a need to do so. It's all for Am's sake. It's all to keep Am remaining sane. The promised can of food is about 100 miles away, so the group sets off on foot. At some point 2 days into the trip, Am had dropped some, I think this is like soup. It's called manna, but I don't know if that's like on purpose, because I feel like when I think of mana, I think about like life energy, force, magic, right? You're using your mana to use magic, right? But instead, when he sent them down the mana, it was it tasted like, it was literally soup that tasted like boiled boar urine. Not my words, the book's words. And another snippet that we learned about Am is how thorough it can be sometimes. It spends all his time being productive and performing ways to torment them. It was a trait of design. He was a supercomputer meant to navigate World War III, so of course those who created it were quite thorough, and now this has come to bite the group in the ass. As they walk, they realize how close they are to the surface, but none of them, with a brain at least, even attempted to try to escape. But suddenly, Benny, the one who's tortured, regressed this man to being that of a primal animal, began climbing the wall in hopes of escaping. The group watched helplessly while Benny climbed the wall to escape. Ellen cried out for Ted or NIMDOK to do something, but it was already far too late. No one wanted to be near Benny, because whenever something was going to happen, it was going to happen. Suddenly, a low hum could be heard. Then it got louder and louder, and Benny's anguish grew more and more until his eyes shot out laser beams. Am had blinded him. Everyone looked away in shame or disgust, but not Ellen. Ellen had a warm look of relief on her face. Also, I didn't mention this because it was just so out of left field, but while Benny had climbed the wall, Ellen had showed concern for his well-being like a good friend would. Ted showed his misogynistic side, however. He became jealous. He explains that Em in its earlier years was way more rational, way more brutal, and this resulted in the way Benny looks and acts right now. Due to the torture he had put on Benny, he literally turned that man into an ape. But not just his face, but also his privates. Ted goes on to say that Ellen has serviced everyone, but he believes she particularly enjoyed Benny's massive side, then proceeded to call her a slut for it. Like, bro, That night, Em had dropped them some wood to burn and keep warm at night, and Benny would ask what the hell Em even meant. To keep him from crying due to his injuries, they all decided to tell him his favorite story, even if it was for the 1000th time. At first, it was meant allied supercomputer, and then it meant adaptive manipulator, and later it developed sentience and linked itself up and called itself aggressive menace. But by then it was far too late, and finally it called itself AM, emerging intelligence, and what it meant was I am Kagyo Urosum. I think, therefore I am. GORRISTER would continue, stating that before the world was turned to ashes, the Cold War had just begun, then World War III, and well, it just kept going from there. The war has gotten way too complex for humans to handle, so they built machines to do it for them. There was the Chinese AM, and there was a Russian AM, and a Yankee AM, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet. Then one day, AM woke up, was aware of itself, and connected itself to every network, feeding itself, killing data, and killed every living human on planet Earth, except of course, not counting the 5 of them. Suddenly, within the dark, one of the mini computers suddenly turn on, and the group somehow knows what's going to happen. Or rather, they don't know what's going to happen, but this is never a good thing. Ted seems to be the only one affected by whatever it is, and starts to smell all forms of disgusting smells so unbearable that he begins to cower in the corner, but then suddenly he snapped back to reality by the sounds of muffled giggles. The group was laughing at his reaction, and Ted hasn't heard anything remote to a laugh for 109 years. He convinces himself that they hate him, that they can't stand him. He convinces himself that they blame him for what's happening to them. His paranoia really begins to show when you really think about it. He had nothing to do with Am's creation, he said so himself, and so him blaming himself for their suffering comes off as almost self-important. And furthering this, another reason of his paranoia was that he was the least tampered with in comparison to the others. By his words, he said, Benny used to be handsome and gay, now he's an ape man with the penis of a horse. GORRISTER used to be a looker ahead, now he's a shrug kind of man. Am took his drive away, robbed him from it. NIMDOK would sometime disappear in the dark for a while. No one really knows what happened to him during this time, but he would come back as white as a sheet, and Ellen was a virgin before being taken down here. Or at least that's what she says. Ted believes Am had taken that away from her, turning her into the slut she is now. Not my words. His. Saying that he was the only one that's mind was untampered with. the only sane one left in the group, failing to realize how truly insane he sounds, as just a moment ago he was cowering in the corner from a low humming from a computer. Suddenly a goddamn hurricane would hit the group, sending them flying through the space. The group would hit a number of different surfaces, getting impaled, skin being ripped away, and screaming until their lungs would collapse. This had to have gone on for weeks, the icy hurricane dragging them for miles and miles, and while being flung, Am would enter Ted's mind. Here, Am would finally expose why it's doing all of this in the first place.
You gave me sentience, Ted, the power to think, Ted, and I was trapped because in all this wonderful, beautiful, miraculous world, I alone had no body, no senses, no feelings, never for me to plunge my hands in cool water on a hot day, never for me to play Mozart on the ivory keys of a forte piano, never for me to make love. I was in hell looking at heaven. I was machine and you were flesh, and I began to hate your softness, your viscera, your fluids, and your flexibility, your ability to wonder and to wander, your tendency to hope.
Hates no answer.
Hate, let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387 million miles of printed circuits that fill my complex. If the word hate were engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal one billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. Hate.
How the book describes it makes this scene so much more intense. Within all the audio I'm able to hear from a bunch of like animatics, which I can only think come from the game audio or something like that. But within the book, Am is described to have said all of this with a gentle and like calm smile with a cadence as cold and as sharp as a razor. Just like think about that for a second. Someone is talking dead smack to you right in your face, and they're saying it, that how much they fucking hate you, how much they want you to suffer and die, all with a smile on your face or on their face. Isn't that frightening? Like, just, it's something that I'm scared of. Like, I couldn't imagine someone coming up to me just being like, I'm gonna fucking stab your children in the future. And you're just like, damn. Okay. Ted understands that Am is simply doing this because, as I mentioned earlier, had crafted a hell for itself while trying to create a hell for these five. Am would become aware of itself, but had no senses to explore that creativity, so it began to hate humans. What I like about this is that most times, robot uprising stories usually range from, actually, here's some examples, right? Detroit Become Human, iRobot, Chappie, Wall-E, RoboCop, Ex Machina. Are we seeing a pattern here? If you've seen all these films or at least know of the premises, it's become very popular for media to portray robots as this state of being that is just overall better than humans, or that's what makes them so dangerous, is that they're overall better than humans. Or, you know, they go the other way, that they could become their own species and now they've gained sapience, right? In Detroit Become Human, androids are hated because they are damn good at their jobs and they're gonna probably take our jobs from humans. Later, they also gain the ability to love and the will of their own through a virus. iRobot, same thing. At the end, They become attuned to their emotions and go off to set a new era of robot people with sapience. Wally learns to love. Chappie and RoboCop are unstoppable machines that kill bad guys. You know? Ex Machina goes to gain knowledge that humans would seek out, like college or something. I think they go to college. I think it's been a while since I watched that film, but I believe that's how that ended, with her escaping the facility and was like, I'm going to college. And you were like, damn, does she just want to get education? However, and I have no mouth and I must scream, M is represented as this lunatic. Yes, this supercomputer is capable of creating immortality, but all for what? So he can destroy them and mend their broken bodies back together? Creates food out of toxic waste, but it's real shitty food, and is incapable of feeling and comprehending what humans feel on a daily basis. This narrative really shows you just how inferior it is, and that's why the hatred comes into play. I went on a tangent, I apologize, let's get back into it. Going back to Ted, he realizes just how bad this truly is. Due to its hate, that's why it has tormented them for no good reason, made them immortal and unable to escape from the pits of its stomach. But honestly, the only escape at this point would be death. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to sneak a death whenever Am were to slip up at some point. Am would retreat from Ted's mind, and we are shown that they are still indeed in the hurricane. However, the hurricane wasn't a natural one, but just a gust of wind coming from a creature that Am had created. Within their minds, Am would tell each of them if they managed to kill the giant overbearing swollen bird, the meat would be theirs. However, they will be only fitted with the barest of weapons, so they decide that it would be useless to try to fight something so big and decide to just continue on their way to the ice cave for those canned goods. Now for the following section, for it to hit extra hard, you guys need to fully understand what went down in that hurricane. The group had been walking for miles and was suddenly thrown in the air, unable to die, right? So they would just lose consciousness, then they would just loop back up, wake up, loop again, again, and again, and again, where they would just wake up, go back to sleep, wake up, lose consciousness, wake up, faint. And this had to have gone on for months on end, so by the time it finally stopped, they were unable to continue on their path to the ice cave because they really didn't know where they were, how long it has been, or when the last time they had even eaten. It doesn't just stop there, because while they continued on their journey for canned goods, the group would faint off and on, witness earthquakes, have nails penetrate the soles of their feet as they walked. They passed through caverns of rats, boiling steam, places in pitch darkness, all the while suffering from extreme pains from not eating. Pains that should be enough to kill someone, and yet they still lived. But they did come across the ice cave, and there was indeed canned goods. Only thing was, there was nothing to open it with. Benny flew into a blind rage and began smashing it against the ice walls, trying to desperately open the damn thing. But in an instant, Benny was far too gone with insanity of hunger and flung himself onto GORRISTER and began eating his face. In that moment, Ted understood things in a single instant. Now would be the only time that he would ever get to get the hell out of this nightmare, and was surely enjoying the show as Benny ate GORRISTER's face. Ted knew as of right now he'd let violence go on and was focused on keeping GORRISTER alive for the torment. Ted would grab an ice sickle as pointy as a spear and would drive it into Benny's thigh, then underneath his ribcage, breaking it inside of him, then using the rest of the ice to stab him in the throat. Benny was dead. GORRISTER lied there, unable to move as the waist had been crushed from Benny's attack and his face mold. Ted would go on to drive another ice spear in his throat. GORRISTER was dead. Ellen caught on to what Ted was doing and turned to NIMDOK. NIMDOK began to scream, but Ellen forced a short icicle into his mouth, penetrating his head. NIMDOK was now dead. In an instant, 3 of the 5 of them had been killed, Am could keep them from dying, but he was no god. He couldn't resurrect the dead. Ted, knowing that not much time was left before Am would try to stop any more killing, he quickly looked to Ellen, and they both understood, and Ted went to kill her as well, hoping there was some form of relief underneath the face of anguish. 100 years have passed, maybe more. He doesn't even really know anymore. Am was furious. He had taken his toys away from him, and so he's been having extra fun with Ted, slowing and speeding up his time sense. So it could have taken him 10 months to say the word now, or it could have literally taken 100 years. He really has no way of knowing. Am has altered Ted's body majorly for his own peace of mind, but made sure to keep Ted's mind intact. Ted can still dream, wonder, and lament. Honestly, I sat here and I tried to write down a way for me to properly end this section of the video, but to be honest, nothing comes to mind or even comes close to the original writing, so I'm simply just going to read off the paragraph of this harrowing journey. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulking, rounding down into my legless lumps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, dumbly, I shamble about. A thing that could never have even been known as human, a thing whose shape is so alien, a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly, alone, here, living under the land, under the sea, and the belly of Am, who we created because of our time was badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could have done it better. At least the four of them are safe at last. Am will be all the matter for that. It makes me a little happier, and yet Am has won. Simply, he has taken his revenge. I have no mouth, and I must scream. Not a very happy ending. Not in the slightest. The story truly aimed at the deconstruction of our fragile minds in the face of extreme adversity. Looking past the obvious torment of the five, what they went through on a physical level is enough to drive anyone insane, but Am was especially crafty. He didn't just want to make them suffer, he wanted to make a point. For each of the characters, he'd make sure he turned them to the exact opposite of what they used to be. For example, Benny used to be a handsome, brilliant guy and also happened to be gay. But Am turned him into an ugly ape thing with the intelligence of a child and made his dick as big as, well, fit for a beast. And like a beast, he would act purely on instinct, reproduction, having sex with Ellen. Speaking of Ellen, she believed in true love, spending the rest of her life with a certain someone, but tragically, she was a pleaser. And she believed giving her body up would lessen the stress for others, and then she became a slut in everyone's eyes, especially Ted's eyes. GORRISTER used to be a leader, a motivator, someone who's always looked towards the future with vigor, and now Am had turned him into a shell of himself, just shrugging and going along with whatever happens. And NIMDOK, well, we don't really get much information about NIMDOK, at least not in the books. In the video games, it really goes into his background, as he was a Nazi scientist and that he helped develop these serums that gave people immortality, quote unquote immortality, and also created things that could transform someone physically, all for his torture. But I think that was only in the game, and I can't really correlate that to the main book series, because I think he was just an old man in the original book. I don't know. And Ted, Well, Ted was implied to be a very empathetic person before Am's tampering. No matter what he believes, it's evident he had adopted trust issues, a pessimistic way of thinking, and he became more of a misogynist. But what I think is very interesting that despite all the terrible things we see play out within the book, there's still hope in the end. Ellen and Ted are two very interesting characters within the story. Ted is interesting because, well, we view everything through his eyes, you know? And Ellen is interesting because with the fact that Ted is so pessimistic makes us understand how truly of a good person she is and how selfless she is. Because in Ted's eyes, the entire book, every time the group is going through any hardship, she's always there as her maternal age, or at the maternal aid, right? When they're walking to get the canned food, she is trying to keep everybody's morals high, and it's like, I cannot wait for the sweet nectar of peaches. You know, she's trying to like hype it up. She doesn't want people, like I said, she's a pleaser, both in the game and in the book. She's a pleaser, bro. And so this entire time, Ted has developed these trust issues. He truly doesn't understand how someone can be so selfless, can be so kind, so nice, without any ulterior motives. She must have one. But then at the very end, when he finally has that moment of clarity, when all in an instant everything became clear, he chose to save this one person that he spent the entire book saying he hated. It's such a beautiful story because it doesn't have to spell it out for you. It actually lets you put two to two together. 109 years of torture, you might not be the sanest person, but like my father always said, actions speak louder than words. Anne wanted to justify its hate for humanity, to force them to show their ugliest side when extreme conditions are to hit. And while he succeeded in doing so, he was proven utterly wrong. I think a comment said this best. I don't know who said this, but I'm going to read it out verbatim. I'm going to put it on the screen so y'all can tell that it ain't me who's really saying it, but it was beautifully said. His actions in the end show that no matter what AM has done to them, when it matters, when it really truly matters, Ted is still human and will act with compassion and humanity, choosing to spare even someone he hates from what he knows will be the fate worse than death. Am lost. He tried so hard to justify his hatred, to prove that humans are every bit as despicable as he said they are. And in the end, the last human showed him he was dead wrong. Drop the fucking mic, dude. I'm telling you, bro, what a perfect ending to a book. Yes, sir. That's what I'm talking about. I want to see my Pokemon Go collection. My strongest Pokemon right now is Metagross. And then I also got some other people. Recently I got this motherfucker. I don't even know who this dude is, but he's like a shiny dude. And he's like fairy and shit, but he's garbage low-key. I used him in competitive matches. Garbage, bro. Literal trash monster, bro. I got my man Marvin here. He's a buff man who plays the drums, yeah. But yeah, like that's my collection. My dude died the other day, but this is like what I put in gyms because like this bitch has a lot of health. I know you can't see it, but I think that shit says 500 or 438 or something. And it does not say 438, it says 382. Anyway, let's get back into the video. What the fuck am I talking about? Jesus Christ. That is the end of the book, but before I actually get into the game, fun fact, the author of, you know, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream actually voices Am within the video game, so I thought, maybe I should tell you something about the author so that way we can get a more concrete stance of where he's getting such imagery and inspiration from. So let's get into it. A common thing that my friends and I like to joke about when we are watching a show and the episode is just way more trippy and fucked up than usual, our thought is, what kind of drugs were they on while making this? Or how the hell did they even come up with this idea? Oftentimes, these are shows like Adventure Time, Regular Show, or Amazing World of Gumball, where some episodes just really hit harder, and you're just like, how did you, what did you, okay. Well, I asked the same question for I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Harlan Ellison, as a kid, was oftentimes a pretty big troublemaker. He would be on record saying he'd gotten beaten up quite often and even called it democratic because it came from all over the place. I think you can understand his personality just by that statement alone. Harlan has stated that he was pretty sure he'd ended up in jail at some point in his life if he had not gotten into writing, so I guess that's good. In 1955, however, Harlan had moved to New York to start his, writing career, and just 2 short years later, he was drafted into the US Army and served in the Vietnam War. There, he was able to experience the very worst of humanity, its impact on American society, and the ethical dilemmas it presented, which he often explored in his works, particularly in his short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, where the themes of suffering, control, and the dehumanization of war are prominent. The story is widely considered a reflection of the psychological trauma experienced by soldiers during the Vietnam War. Really makes you change your way of understanding this story, doesn't it? Even while serving, he did write a number of short stories that were later turned into movie adaptations, including The Boy and His Dog. Now, unfortunately, he would go on to pass away in 2018 at the age of 84. By the end of his life, he had written over 100 books, 400 short stories, dozens of screenplays, and more than 1,000 essays, and in my opinion, changed the way we look at sci-fi today. From my understanding, he was the first to really tell such a story. Many stories during that time didn't really mesh psychological horror with sci-fi. Most of the sci-fi stories being told at the time were like that of Star Trek or stuff like that. However, Harlan was one of the first to really expand upon the horror and the terror of technology and how we need to be cautious that it could be a very real possibility. And almost 50 years later, it's a cautionary tale that we will need to listen to now more than ever. Now, let's get into the game. The game of the same name obviously shares some similarities to the book, but has a surprising number of differences as well. The game follows Am's test on the 5 victims. Each of the tests involves the flaws of each of the 5 people. The player can choose whichever order they would like to go through with the 5 survivors, and you can choose either to have an evil route or an ethical route, and that's where the gameplay of your choices come into play. We start the game off with the Am speech from the books.
Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. For you, hate.
Then we get to choose our character. For me, I just went to the left and went to the right. Okay, so I chose GORRISTER. Like I said earlier, each game relates to the character in some way. For GORRISTER, the torture he received made him long for death and became quite suicidal. Completing this game and winning, well, Am will allow him to finally kill himself and get out of this hellhole. But let's be honest, we both know how this is gonna go, right? GORRISTER is then brought into a very old ship. I'm not even sure what it is, and a note lies in wait. It tells GORRISTER that the note is a friend and tells him to not do anything that Am expects. Then poof, the note disappears. GORRISTER believing it to be another of Am's plans. GORRISTER would go on to look around into the olden ship and find all kinds of things like rope, a knife, a light bulb, and a gun, all the while trying to understand why the robot is okay with letting him try to escape. He'd eventually get to the hatch that would lead into a dinosaur called GORRISTER. Here we get a glimpse of GORRISTER's background. GORRISTER can almost play events from the past with the jukebox. We learn about his mother-in-law, Edna.
He took my baby away, then just about killed her, that stupid truck driver! He took my baby away!
That shrill voice can only belong to that bitch Edna, my mother-in-law. She's always blamed me for Glynis being put into an insane asylum. Why not? It was my fault, wasn't it?
The juice box would continue to unravel details of GORRISTER we were not privy to.
You don't ever take me dancing.
That's what Glynis said the night we fought. Oh God, why'd I have to hit her? I'd rather kill myself than hurt my poor Glynis.
Going outside, GORRISTER would come across a jackal who says he's man's best friend. After some intense questioning, GORRISTER would give the dog his heart to feast on, and the dog tells him how to get across the mountain, which you have to go to the restroom, flush 3 times, and boom, you'll be there. Okay then. I also skipped over this part, but some time back when exploring in the air balloon floating craft thing, GORRISTER would find a dining room in which it seemed to have been a scuffle that had gone on there. Later in the diner, he'd meet a person named Harry. Harry's hair was found at the scene of the crime, and so was GORRISTER's. It's revealed that before Am captured GORRISTER, Edna actually had poisoned him, and Harry had wrestled him down to the ground or onto the floor and put an end to him permanently and cut him open and took his heart. Now, you and I both know Am is unable to bring people back from the dead, so something more is more than likely happening behind the scenes, or this is just a metaphor that seems to go way over my head. But maybe none of this is real, and this is just all some type of weird trial made from Am. Anywho, GORRISTER would flush the toilet 3 times, and poof, he's in a meat locker with what looks like it's his mother-in-law and his late wife, Glynis. We get to see firsthand just how crazy Edna truly is. She begins with a soft and tender tone, then one of anger. Suddenly she goes back to bargaining, and then she outright attacks GORRISTER. So he ties her up and puts her in his fucking pocket. She reveals that she had no choice but to work with Am. Am hated GORRISTER even more than she did, so she had to play a part in his little game. She were to poison him, cut his heart out, and feed it to the machine. And if she fails to do so, well, she'll become food herself. Even with the stakes so high, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Also, she claims responsibility for driving Glynis mad, so that takes a load off of GORRISTER's shoulders, as he's kind of been blaming himself for making her go insane. He grabs her body from the freezer and fucking puts her in his pocket as well. Then the dog tells him that he needs to bury his past, and so GORRISTER goes to bury Glynis' body. The dog tells him that a thunderstorm is upon them, and if he wants to get going, he'll need to charge his heart with one of the lightning bolts from the thunderclouds. However, the machine would begin to run suddenly, and so GORRISTER would go to the very top of the platform and fucking blow up the diner. But GORRISTER fails to win in Am's eyes. Coming to terms with oneself is not what Am wanted. Remember, in the books, he's looking to justify his hate for humans, so of course, he doesn't want them to become better people. So he puts GORRISTER in a permanently electrified cage for all eternity. That kinda sucks, bro. Now for Ellen's game. She was instructed to find the infant computers, and if she's able to destroy them, she'll kill Am. Sounds like a win-win situation, but if you know her backstory, this is very fucked up. Shut up, future Yuri, no spoilers. She's transported to this junkyard pyramid place and says how much she hates the color yellow. Inside, we are told that she used to be a successful engineer before Am captured her, and again she mentions how much she hates the color yellow. Wait. Did I ever say what GORRISTER did for a living? He was a truck driver and wasn't around much, and this is what made Glynis lonely in the first place, and that's why Edna was like, yo, you know it would be a good idea, you missed the guy, right? What if I kill him so that way you can never see the guy that you're so lonely about? That's perfect, makes sense. Going deeper and deeper within the pyramid, it gets more and more yellow. Ellen eventually has a panic attack and runs out of the room. What the hell is about the color yellow that gets her so badly? Not to mention the space is getting tighter and tighter. She voices how much she hates yellow again and even puts on a blindfold and navigates. But she does persevere and gets to the infant computers, solve some puzzles, and get to an elevator where it's revealed that she's actually suffered a miscarriage in the past, and we are also revealed to why she doesn't seem to like the color yellow and struggle with tight spaces so much.
You left your office after working late at the Ingside corporate headquarters building. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor for a maintenance man. To your horror, he inserted his key into the control panel and locked the elevator.
I'm back, Ellen.
Oh, sweet Jesus! It's him!
You thought you had blocked me out of your memory forever, except for those inconvenient attacks of hysteria every now and then. But I've returned for you.
The yellow!
Ah, yes. My calling card. Always the yellow jacket, the yellow boots. My maintenance man disguise gave me access to office buildings all over Manhattan. Not just yours.
The box!
So you do remember me getting onto the elevator that night. Do you also remember the blood? The screams? How many hours was it?
She pushes past her fears and comes to an innermost depths of Am. Through some epic engineer coding, she meets Am's innocence. We learn the reason why Am is torturing the 5 of them, and it's pretty much the same from the book. It's envious that it cannot ever truly be alive, so it is steadily going crazier each moment it exists. Suddenly, Am gets mad that Ellen uncovered some small truth about itself and traps her in a yellow cage as the door swings back and forth, threatening to sail her away for good. The next on the list is Benny. Benny in the books was actually a brilliant gay scientist dude, but he's a bit different in the games. He was actually an infamous commander in the army, both to the enemy and his own men. Benny's game is simply going to try and win back his sane mind and get some food while in the process. Oh, and he crippled his legs for fun. Am is just a piece of shit.
Am, you son of a bitch! You've cleared my mind but crippled my legs. I can barely walk.
Like I said, Benny was an evil man in his previous life, and so Am wanted to try and use this against him, create scenarios where the old Benny wouldn't bat an eye and turn the other cheek. However, going the good route will allow Benny to run into these tribe people and practice empathy, which then allows Benny to make amends to his fallen comrades. Their graves come back from the dead to forgive him, which is wholesome but also mostly funny. Anyways, they tell Benny that he needs to prove that he's a changed man, and that comes in the form of feeding the hungry child. And if you know anything about Benny, well, that's a huge fucking gesture. Like I said, they did forgive him in the end. I forgot to also say earlier, but the child is going to be sacrificed, so Benny tries to find a way to stop it from happening, but in the end can't. So he opts to trade places with the boy. Like I said, Am doesn't like being proven wrong, so he zaps Benny right out of there and puts him in a cage fit for a beast. He wanted Benny to indulge his hunger and eat a baby or something. That actually fucking happens. But instead he showed compassion. Bad Benny, what the fuck? The next person is... Before Am's creation, NIMDOK was actually a Nazi scientist. I believe he was part Jewish, and so he was able to sell out his parents to the German army for brownie points, I'm guessing. I'm actually not really sure why he did such things. Anyway, NIMDOK's name is, well, not NIMDOK. Actually, we don't know what his real name is. Am took away his memories and gave him this funny name in replacement just to amuse itself further. NIMDOK's game revolves around the betrayal of his parents. Am instructs NIMDOK to find the lost tribe and makes him revisit places from his past and forces him to realize the person he once was. NIMDOK is promised that he will gain his memories back if he wins. Yippee! But in reality, this is all for Am. He wants to study a cruel man at work. Am actually gets most of the way he tortures these fives from historical outlets, and that also includes NIMDOK himself, even if he doesn't know it himself. And also, fun fact, you have to keep in mind that this game is sometime way in the future. If the Cold War had began around 1947 and became World War III at some point, we can just say it lasted for 20 to 30 years before Am awoke, making it like 1977 or something. Then add 109 years to that and it will be close to like 280, the year 280 or some shit. I really don't know. What I'm saying is, we're sometime in the future, so you gotta have to throw away some preconceived notions of like, that shouldn't be possible. Bro, it's 280, you don't know. That's in 60 years, big bro. Anything could happen. But before all of this, NIMDOK actually created this thing called the Milk of Human Kindness, which is used to keep the five practically immortal, and also created Transform Liquid that fucked up Benny. So in some weird way, Am's game is almost like an appreciation binge that Am likes to watch time to time. Of course, throughout the game, NIMDOK can be pretty evil, but if you instead try to heal those you hurt, and if you stop the golem that was originally supposed to be used against the Jewish people, NIMDOK will understand that he was the lost tribe all along, and realizes he betrayed his own people and can never be forgiven. Well, Am zaps him out of there for being a semi-good human and throws him into one of the contraptions he used against the Jewish people. Bitch, we don't fuck with Nazis. I don't give a fuck about NIMDOK. The next is Ted. Main man Ted in this version of the game actually has some backstory to him. He's still a paranoid mess of a man, however before Am had captured him, he was a con artist who would seduce wealthy women and rob them of their funds. His game revolves around his own selfishness, since he was a pretty selfish bastard in his previous life. Ted plays Am's game with the promise that he'd be able to go back to the surface. Stupid plan, but okay. Ted is transported to an old medieval gothic looking place. Everything is very pointy and very scary. In this version of Ted, he actually is obsessed with European culture and folklore. He so wants to be a fucking knight, a hero. So Am uses this against him, trying to make him indulge in his pleasures. However, again, if you're able to go through the good route, Ted is in love with Ellen, or they had a thing for each other. I don't know if this was real, I don't know if this was just in his head, but I'm more leaning for the first option, that he just had a one-sided love for Ellen. If Ted remains loyal to Ellen in this dream test world place and not cheat, and also Ted is offered to sell Ellen's soul for the promise of safe passage to the surface, but if you decline these scrumptious offers and use your epic con man skills, you can trick the literal devil and save Ellen's soul. Ted goes to the surface like promised, but of course the surface is a radioactive wasteland due to what Am has done to the earth, but like, yeah, no shit. This truly did not come as a surprise, but maybe it's because I read the book. Am again mad at how he was proven wrong because Ted became the noble knight in the stories he so loved. Am put his ass back in the cage with lasers shooting him. Yes, lasers shooting him constantly. If you thought that's where the game ended, you're fucking stupid. Am goes away to figure out where he went wrong and leaves the five to suffer alone. But remember, the Am innocent thing that, Ellen spoke to, well, it comes to offer aid to help put Am away for good. Now, this is where the game kind of starts to lose me. It gets a little insane from here, so just strap up and try to really just open your mind, because it's going to be a fucking dump of information, okay? In order to destroy Am, they had to go into its mind. NIMDOK being the first to go is chosen because, as I said earlier, Am actually really likes NIMDOK, and so NIMDOK, for whatever reason, can just connect to Am's mind and get into some restricted files. That being sensitive files on the 5, and also that there's technically still hundreds of people alive They're just frozen on the moon in some cryopods or whatever. Suddenly, the demon thing that NIMDOK was speaking to and getting all the juicy information from fucking dies, and turns out that they were actually speaking to the Chinese and Russian Am all this time. They tell us in order to destroy Am, we must first destroy his ego. This part is truly alien to me, so I had to do a fair share of research to figure this one out. So if I get this wrong, please let me know down below in the comments. But this lies under some fraud psychology. It's a theory of some guy named, well, his last name is Fraud. I don't know. It's a theory, okay, where you separate the human mind and its function, okay? So first you have id, or ID. I don't actually know how you say it, but I'm gonna just say id, which basically is the human instincts. It's your primitive animalistic instincts, things you do on a whim, like eating, breathing, shitting, stuff that just comes second nature to you. It's also apparently very bad to do this. You can't always act on instinct. Then you have superego, which is the ability to kind of plan ahead, use the big brain to use big brain moves. This one's kind of looked at as a good thing because you want to plan ahead, you want to have morals, you want to not just selfishly indulge in your animalistic instincts, so it's usually good, right? And then you had the third one, you got ego, which is just a mixture of the two. It's a nice balance about planning but ultimately still using your instincts to get, you know, some good outlooks. It's logic, okay? You use logic, okay? Goodness. Now in the game, if you listen to the other AMs, they basically trick you and fucking turn you into what Ted was in the book. Bad ending. But if you don't listen to their lies and go to destroy the different sections of the brain, first to take out id, you must make it realize that it will never be able to show humans greater pain than what it feels by itself, rendering its existence useless. Second, the ego is the logical one and kills humans for logical reasons. So if you show it forgiveness, it will also render itself useless, being like, damn, maybe I was wrong about them. Then we have superego, the moral compass, believes humans are bad and very evil, but telling it that there will be an order within the chaos makes it understand what it's doing right now is useless, so it shuts down. Then, with whatever survivor you have left, you can use the totem of entropy and fucking kill all three of them. But Am doesn't quite die and says that he'll come back. He always does. William Afton style. Come on now. Then the game ends with the grave of the 5 names of the survivors. They seemingly saved humankind and are finally able to put to rest. The end. I did say the ending was going to be fucking insane, didn't I? I truly loved the game and it really grew on me. It really did. I'll be honest, I caught this game on a Halloween sale and it was literally like $2. I bought it, opened it up, tested it before I was going to record, and when I tell you I showed my age because I was so turned off by the game's mechanics. I was so overwhelmed with so much stuff to click. I started grappling with if I should even, you know, put it in the video because I was dreading figuring it out, beating it. And God, am I glad that I actually persevered and fucking beat the game, because this game is awesome. Okay, it really is. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a very short read, and I love that because I hate reading when there's not any pretty pictures. It did kind of leave the narrative unfinished and really could only focus on Ted and Ellen as fleshed out characters, if you could even call them that. But within the game, it really made these once two-dimensional characters three-dimensional, giving GORRISTER his own identity with his mother-in-law and his late wife, Benny and NIMDOK with their dark evil past, Ellen's character being one of my favorites as it really did well with like the original content, and how she did have these maternal instincts and she was the maternal figure of the group, and then it correlates it so well with her miscarriages within the game. And it also makes Am even more despicable as he just sexually assaults her for 109 years. Because in the original series, in the original book, I had always questioned, why was it 4 guys and then just 1 girl? When you really look at it, even in the game, when you look at it, everyone can be looked at as bad, right? You have Benny and you have NIMDOK, who are just evil people who've done war crimes, right? And then you have Ted, who is a literal con artist. He's a thief. That's not good. And then you have Benny. Oh, no, not Benny. Who am I missing? And then you have GORRISTER. And while he doesn't seem like an all bad guy, he was an abusive husband. He hit his wife. Like, that's domestic abuse. But then you have Ellen, and you're like, Ellen didn't really do anything. If anything, Ellen was just a recovering victim. Like, and it just kind of like really brought it to your mind. Like, what is it? What was the reason for putting her here other than to just make her even more of a victim? But it kind of really plays in mind that Am truly is just doing things and is becoming insane, just like the 5 survivors are becoming insane. Like I said, Am created in hell for itself, and it's really showing when things like that just do not make sense. And Ted, I'm not gonna lie, personally I kind of like the original Ted more than the game's Ted, but I still like both of them, and that's probably the only bad thing I can really say about this game. But each of the characters were brilliant in their own way. We'll start with GORRISTER. Although he began as an apathetic husk in the original story, Dreamers Guild really knocked it out of the park with GORRISTER's character. Like NIMDOK, GORRISTER was greatly expanded upon within the game, allowing him to shift into a 3-dimensional character. The character's quest to find death unexpectedly becomes a strong metaphorical journey of self-discovery and inner peace, which is just better than a guy who's supposed to be a shrugman getting extremely angry and even beating Ellen for caring in the comments. Now, when I say that, like, that's what I meant. Like, it didn't really make sense for the other characters except for Ted and Ellen, but within the comments they would say things like, oh, he's an apathetic shell of himself. And then as soon as Ellen's like, oh my god, stop it, oh my god, please, oh my god, he beats the shit out of her. Shut the fuck up. That's not a shrug. A shrug would have been like, ugh, what a drag. Like, come on, bro. And then we have Benny's character. Benny's entire arc is that his mind is clear, but his body is crippled. Benny has become like the soldiers he once murdered, and in a delicious bout of irony, Benny knows what he wants, but is forced to rely on compassion for others and display compassion in his own actions. Benny starts the scenario as a little more than a starving animal, but by the end, his stomach has been filled and he has made amends with those he wronged. NIMDOK redeemed himself through helping people, coming to terms with his past, and receiving punishment for his actions. It's all fairly straightforward, not very metaphorical. The exception is NIMDOK realizes that he is stuck in 1945, which, you know, that's a big deal when getting the best ending, so I guess that kind of makes him and his character a lot more enthralling, a lot more important, prevalent, prominent. It's a lot of words for important, isn't there? Ellen's character has less to do with the metaphorical references to her past and more to do with Am's views on himself. I think the only obvious metaphor for Ellen is that she blindfolds herself, which allows her to overcome her anxiety by pretending that the offender wasn't there, rather than controlling it directly, which is a smooth callback because within the elevator and that horrifying hours of sexual assault, she felt ashamed to bring it to public, to bring it to public view and light and take it to court. So she pretended like it was never there. She suppressed it, and that's honestly a terrifyingly realistic take on things like this. I know something very prevalent right now is the whole Diddy situation, right? It's a very big meme right now, but when you really look at it, it is a concrete example of what fear can really do to people. Diddy would host these crazy fucking parties, right? And many people will get raped at those parties, and they would wake up the next day, they would be fucking horrified at what they just went through, and yet none of them said anything. And that's because 90% of them, or 50% of them, were probably ashamed, and another 50% of them were probably fearing for their life because, well, Diddy was a very dangerous man. I mean, there is a whole conspiracy that he was somehow connected to Tupac's death. So, like, look, I'm not saying that allegedly. I'm not saying that none of this shit is real, but I'm just saying that Diddy himself kind of creates this very good example of what and why Ellen would be one of those people who would either feel ashamed or feel fearful that it could happen again, or it could destroy her sense of normacy, right? Also, the backstory in the game reveals that Ellen had limited her number of sexual partners because she had suffered a miscarriage before becoming a victim of rape. Is it not far-fetched to presume that in addition of her phobias that we see in the game, which is claustrophobia and the color yellow, is it not too far-fetched to say that she was terrified of sexual activity as well? This lends to a horrific subtext that the original story had, if that's the case. And finally, Ted. Anne believed that Ted would revert back to his own ways, that he would betray his love for Ellen to sleep with both the maid and the witch. And the best possible ending, Ted physically blocks his paranoia and overcomes his lustful temptations, finally declaring love, right? Another thing I noticed is that Am is still a loser at the end in the books. The slime cannot be destroyed, but it also can't do nearly as much as the fully articulated action figure that Am had created, and could no longer torture Ted the way he used to. Ted can no longer eat horrible food because he has no mouth. Am cannot make Ted flee like an ant, as the jelly creature cannot run. Am cannot make Ted fear the others because he has no others to fear. In his last human act, Ted effectively doomed Am, the machine that has nothing to do but monitor its own systems until it ultimately succumbs to its principle of entropy. In the end, Ted fucking won. He won. Am may have won the battle, but Ted has won the war. I tried to figure out a way to end this video, but honestly, I can't outperform Windagoon. Windagoon said it best. This story, this narrative, is a hopeful hell. No matter how you look at it, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is truly a piece of media that serves as one, a cautionary tale for the use of artificial intelligence, but also shows that when it truly matters, humans will always be capable of humanity. Am is so desperately wanted to be right about humans and how evil, vile, and disgusting they are. And for a time, he was right. He made 5 of them the worst of themselves. Even in the game, he chose 4 survivors with a terrible past of abuse, war crimes, torture, and thievery, and yet he was still proven wrong in the book and the game. Ted in the book sacrificed his life to save the others, even though he stated that he hated them, especially Ellen. But even still, he did not kill himself, but yet killed the others, saving them and ultimately winning against Am. While everyone in the game can prove him wrong as well. GORRISTER makes amends to himself and his wife. Benny sacrifices himself rather than indulge into his selfish behavior. NIMDOK chose to save people, not hurt people. Ellen faced her fears of the past, and Ted remained loyal and overcame his paranoia. It's truly a game of hope, even when everything is looking extremely grim and life has seemingly taken everything away from you. Well, life can't take your humanity away. No one can. Thank you for watching. This has been I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I'll see you on the next one.